How do you manage your Australian bank accounts as an Australian expat living in Singapore? Hi there, Jared Brown here, Australian expat financial planner, and in this video I'm going to share with you some simple tips for some all too common mistakes that we see Australian expats making when it comes to managing their bank accounts back home. So let's dive right in. Now, number one is the actual address that you have on the bank account. We see all sorts of weird and wonderful things that people are doing in this instance, from putting family members' address on the account, or a friend down the road, or a neighbour, or simply not updating their Australian address because the bank told them it was too hard, or the bank didn't really understand how an Australian could live in a different country. So what you do need to do is make sure that your foreign address, your address here in Singapore, is on file with the bank. Ideally, it's on that account. At the very least, it should be your correspondence address on the actual profile that you have with the bank as well. And that flows into the tax, it flows into the tax residency as well, which brings us on to tip number 2. And that is making sure that your tax ID number is on file with the bank. So for most of us who are living in Singapore as Australian expats on an employment pass, that is our FIN number. So our foreign ID number, that is our tax reference number. If you're a PR or Singapore citizen, then that would be your NRIC. That is your tax ID number. It needs to be on file with the Australian bank because that is how withholding tax is calculated and applied. And that brings us on to tip number 3. That is withholding tax. As a Singapore tax resident, withholding tax should be 10%. That is 10% of the interest that you earn, not 10% interest. So if you had, for example, $100,000 in your bank account in Australia and you earn 5% interest, that interest would be $5,000 per year. The withholding tax would be 10% of that $5,000, which is $500. You need to make sure this withholding tax is being applied at the correct rate, and you need to ensure that it is being applied at all. Because having an Australian address on your bank account would be one of the things that the Australian Tax Office would look at in the event that your residency was in question. So the final tip for you when it comes to your Australian bank accounts, and that is tip number 4, is to consider whether you should use just an everyday savings account, whether you should use a term deposit or some sort of rolling fixed term deposit, or utilizing an offset account. Now, many people will make the mistake of assuming an offset account is best because the interest rate is higher, but you need to factor in the lost tax benefits as well when it comes to those tax credits to be used for later on. I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you a bit of food for thought for managing your Australian bank account as an expat here in Singapore. Drop me a note with any questions at all. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.